We have two scripture readings this morning. The first is the so familiar Psalm 23. Some of you may know it even by heart, perhaps in the King James Version. This is the version from the New Revised Standard Bible. But if you want to just say the words along that you know in your heart, feel free to do so. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You make me lie down in green pastures, lead me beside still waters, and restore my soul. You lead me in right paths for your name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Our second reading comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7. After Jesus had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. A centurion there had a servant whom he valued highly and who was ill and close to death. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they appealed to him earnestly, saying, "This Roman officer is worthy of having you do this for him, for he loves our people, and it is he who built our synagogue for us." And Jesus went with them. But when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I did not presume to come to you, but only speak the word and let my servant be healed. For I am also a man set under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and the servant does it." When Jesus heard all of this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd that followed him, he said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant in good health. May these words be to us our light and our life. Thanks be to God. Harry Yablonsky entered the Army in those intense months following the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was called up and sent to Texas for basic training. It was the first time the 30-year-old had been away from home, and he missed the comfort of his mother's cooking. He also missed the companionship of his longtime girlfriend, Sarah Kulzer, even though their romance was a bit controversial for both families. He was Jewish, she was Catholic. Without telling his family, Harry wrote to Sarah to come to Texas so they could get married. She went, and they were married, much to the surprise of both families. A year later, my dad was born on that base. In 1944, my grandfather was discharged. But he never fought in a battle, was never sent on a mission, and in fact, he never left Texas. In 1944, he simply came home. The observance of Memorial Day began in 1868 as a time of remembrance of the dead on both sides of the Civil War. It remains a moment in our civic life to take seriously the human costs of war exacted from those who fight them. So why would I mention my grandfather's story, the story of a non-combatant survivor of war, someone who got to come home on this day when we remember the dead? Well, like many veterans, Harry didn't talk much of his military service. This created some mystery around the circumstances of his discharge, but everyone in our family told the same story. Harry became extremely anxious about the prospect of participating in war. At some point, he broke under the pressure and the thought of having to kill or be killed. My dad has a copy of his honorable discharge order, but it says nothing about the reasons he was discharged. It was assumed, I think, in our family that Harry lived with some kind of confounding mix of extreme gratitude and shame about leaving the Army. After being discharged, Harry, Sarah, and baby Steve moved back to Minnesota. Harry, a budding local jazz musician, thought Harry Yablonsky was a bad stage name, so he changed the last name to Blons. He opened a music store that is now Cadenza up on Snelling Avenue, and he eventually became my Zadie. This Memorial Day weekend, as we remember those who died in war, might we also remember those who return from military service, alive in body, but whose soul is seared by shame, guilt, grief, or despair. To be sure, my grandfather's experiences as a soldier were perhaps mild compared with the extreme violence and terror and tragedy experienced by soldiers who were on the front lines. The impact of those experiences on the hearts and souls of surviving soldiers must be included as we add up the human costs of war and remember all that has been sacrificed. Captain Tyler Boudreau, retired U.S. Marines, fought in Iraq. One of Captain Boudreau's regular assignments was to call home to tell families when their son or daughter had been injured. During a speech in 2012, he explains what this was like. I held in my hand one night a casualty report about a Marine in Iraq who was going into surgery to have both legs amputated. This report was 14 hours old. I didn't know his condition or his location. I didn't know if he made it through surgery or if he was alive or dead. All I knew is that he was alone in Iraq, getting his legs cut off, and that is what I had to tell his mother. So you can expect that his mother did not receive my call well. She screamed at me, she cried, she cursed at me and the Marine Corps, and then she hung up on me. And then she called me back at midnight looking for updates, but there were no updates. So she called me back again at 1, at 2, at 3 in the morning. She was begging me for good news, but I didn't have any good news. I wasn't in the good news business. All the while throughout this country, there was an epidemic spreading quietly, an epidemic of suicides among veterans, thousands of them, approximately 22 a day, taking their own lives here in the safety of America for what can only be explained as an inability to reconcile the deeds that they had done in war with their sense of morality. What the suicide epidemic made me notice, says Boudreau, was that in all those casualty calls that I made and all those wounds I had to report to families, hundreds of them, hundreds, never once did I pick up the phone and say to Mom and Dad, "Your son is coming home with a broken heart." Never once did I say that. In these times of war, it seems to me that our thoughts tend to linger on the battlefield amongst those stories, glorious and tragic, of service members in the fight, but in doing so, we can sometimes forget about the war's devastation right here at home, to our own families, and to our humanity as a people. What Boudreau calls the inability to reconcile the deeds of war with our sense of morality is now a recognized injury by the VA, moral injury. Named by clinicians in 2009, moral injury was distinguished for the first time from the experiences associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. Moral injury includes feelings of sorrow, moral outrage, grief, regret, shame, guilt, and the lingering sense that there's something wrong with you. It is the result of the morally ambiguous situations that happen in combat and the lingering questions as a result. How is it possible to kill someone and then simply return to your family as if nothing happened? Could you trust anyone to love you again with your heart so full of anger, so numb, or so full of shame and grief? How can you speak of what you have become? Can you even trust yourself? While there are approximately 52,000 veterans who are living with physical injuries from the past two wars, estimates are that there are 500,000 veterans who live with invisible psychological injuries. Captain Boudreau says, "War is the foyer to hell. Coming home is hell." We often read this familiar psalm, Psalm 23, at memorial services. Its words offering reassurance to those who walk in the shadow of death. Theologian Rita Nakashima Brock, author of Soul Repair, Recovering from Moral Injury After War, and a member of my former congregation, once preached a wonderful Veterans Day sermon using the 23rd Psalm as the text. And reading it in that context, Brock wondered if it could have been written by a soldier. Surely a soldier dreams of green pastures and still waters amidst the chaos of war. Her soul aches for restoration. A soldier knows intimately the landscape along the valley of the shadow of death where comfort is scarce. God's grace might appear as an unexpected table of connection prepared in the presence of one's enemies. And confronted with his or her participation in the evils of war, the soldier reaches out for God's mercy and goodness for whatever days they have left. Kevin Benderman's family in Tennessee had a record of military service that went all the way back to the Revolution. To honor that legacy, he wanted to go to war for himself, so he re-enlisted after 9/11 and was deployed to Iraq. He was unprepared for what he experienced, despite all of his good training. The mass graves, the injured children his unit was too busy to stop and help, and the kind of callous inhumanity he saw on his own side, in himself and in the Iraqis fighting desperately to survive. He remembers the surprise and relief of an Iraqi school teacher who spoke English and invited him and his unit to dinner and treated them with kind and good hospitality. Kevin wondered how a Muslim could do this with his enemies, so he bought and read a copy of the Quran, only to find inspiring stories and characters in it, just like in his Christian Bible. When Kevin came home, he struggled with his memories, and when he was ordered to redeploy, he applied for conscientious objector status. His request was denied, and so he went to prison instead. And when he came out, he was so upset and angry, he lost his family in a divorce and started driving truck for some years, alone with his own thoughts. This theologian I mentioned, Rita Brock, also grew up in a military family, witnessing the silent suffering of her father. And she helped start the Center for Soul Repair at Bright Divinity School to help veterans recover from the moral injury of war. The center has developed resources and study guides to empower communities to respond to and support veterans because, she writes, I think the way a person is restored to a sense of their own goodness is that they participate in a life of the community, where the things they do for other people are deeply appreciated, and they have reflected back to them a sense that they are loved and appreciated for what they do. I think I see some evidence of this kind of healing in what Jesus offers to the centurion in our other reading today. Though he is on the other side from Jesus, Jews and Romans being sworn enemies, I think there is still evidence of offering reconciliation and healing. The centurion asked Jesus to heal his servant. The elders come, and Jesus hears how this centurion has been a friend to the Jews, helping build their synagogue. Seeing the centurion's compassion, seeing the humanity of someone who's supposed to be on the other side of the conflict, Jesus lifts him up and celebrates his faith. Yes, Jesus heals the servant, but perhaps more importantly, he honors the centurion's humanity. Eventually, Kevin Benderman started attending Iraq Veterans for Peace meetings and began to connect with his community of fellow veterans. And after the suicide of one of their most beloved members, Kevin decided he wanted to work with veterans who are struggling and need a place for healing, a place where they can get themselves together. So what's in this for us? Well, given our commitment as a peace church, we probably don't need another reason to oppose war. Adding moral injury to the list of the costs of war probably does not surprise us. Our protests of war and reputation as a peace-building church are well known. But how do we let people know that this is a place where veterans can experience soul repair? There are and have been veterans in this congregation. Wes, for one, who rang our bell this morning, Gordy. How might we let others know that God's table of reconciliation and healing is set and seats are still available? For if we do not, thousands of veterans, like my grandfather, may go through life with their moral injuries untreated. So this weekend, as we gather for Memorial Day picnics and family feasts, let us honor those who served this country and made sacrifices on our behalf. Let us dedicate our feasting not only to them, but also to the God of green pastures and still waters, whose love can restore the soul. Amen.